You can't directly control sleep. But what's really interesting is that the more you try to do it, the less likely it is to happen. And what this means is that if your sleep isn't where you want it to be, it can make it feel like this situation is completely out of control and you can't influence it at all, which makes the situation feel like it's gathering speed and gathering momentum, which can make you feel quite worried and anxious, which famously makes sleep even more difficult. But through this video, I'm going to show you that you actually have a lot more control in this situation than you might think you do. Broadly speaking, there are two systems that control our sleep. The first is this idea that the longer we're awake, the more sleepy we feel, which most people are pretty much on board with. What it comes back to biochemically is this substance called adenosine. So whenever we're awake, our body makes adenosine. The adenosine accumulates, and the more adenosine we have, the more sleepy we feel. And the only thing that can get rid of adenosine is sleep. So basically, the longer we're awake, the more sleepy we feel. The best way I think there is to really understand this is to think back to the last time that you stayed up all night. Whether this was because of travelling or socialising or working, whatever the reason, the experience is usually the same. That you go past your normal bedtime, you start to feel sleepy, you might yawn, you might think about your bed, but you can usually push through. Most people can make themselves stay awake if they really need to. But it gets progressively more difficult as the night goes on, usually reaching a peak at around 3 or maybe 4 in the morning. This is when most people say it's most difficult to stay awake, that your brain grinds to a halt, you can barely keep your eyes open, and you're freezing cold, which I'll talk about. But what's interesting is that as the night goes on from there, as you get close to say 8 or 9 in the morning, you've been awake for longer, but you're starting to feel more alert. You're starting to feel more awake. And so it can't just be how long you've been awake for that influences how sleepy you feel. There has to be something else. And there is, and that's the second system that controls our sleep, which is the circadian rhythm, sometimes also called the internal body clock. But this is this natural rhythm, this natural momentum we have that tells us, is it day or is it night? And we've evolved this because as a species, we're very reliant on light to carry out what we do, that we're not a species that can hear well. We're not a species that can sniff our way through a forest. We need to be able to see, to be able to do things. And so we've evolved to be active during the daylight hours and sleep at night. And this just carries on with its own natural momentum to the point where, you could put 10 people in a cave if you wanted, and you could ask them 3 days, 5 days later, is it day or is it night? And they'll know because of this internal rhythm that's ongoing the whole time. So you can see on this chart the two systems that control sleep. So you've got the circadian rhythm that's fluctuating along the chart here, and then you've also got the adenosine sleep drive. So this person's woken up at 7 a.m. and because they're awake, they start building adenosine. The adenosine accumulates, and the more adenosine they have, the more sleepy they feel. Your circadian rhythm kicks up into the wake phase and keeps you feeling alert during the day, but it takes this downturn in the early evening, which corresponds to a very high adenosine. And so this person has a strong urge to fall asleep, which for this person happens at 11 p.m. And you can see that because they've fallen asleep, their adenosine has dropped right off. And this all happens during the lowest phase of the circadian rhythm, during the sleep phase. And circadian rhythms, they are rhythms. They have that beat and that regularity, and they kick up at the same time each morning. So these are people who wake up at 7 a.m. every morning, whether they've got an alarm set or not. So that's a circadian thing. And you can see that because they've woken up, they start building adenosine. So that's a typical day, a typical way that your sleep is controlled. But if you don't go to bed, if you stay up all night, then it looks like this. So the first part of the chart's actually the same, but this vertical black line, this is your normal bedtime. But if you don't go to bed, if you stay up, then you'll continue to build adenosine through the night as well. Your circadian rhythm is a rhythm. It has that beat and that regularity and that independence. And this is that point at maybe 3 or 4 in the morning when you can barely keep your eyes open, you feel like a zombie and you're freezing cold. So these are really typical features of the lowest point of your circadian rhythm. But as the night goes on from here, as you get close to say 8 or 9 in the morning, the reason you start to feel more alert is because you've gone into the day phase of your circadian rhythm. And this will keep you ticking over during the day. But anyone who's done an all-nighter will know that the big crash happens that second night when you get that circadian downturn, which corresponds to an extremely high adenosine because you've been up all night, that this is when sleep becomes irresistible. This is when you have to be careful on the train because you'll end up at the end of the track. Because sleep is so hard to fight off. And this is actually a really interesting thing to use in a sleep clinic to get people to fall asleep quicker and stay asleep. And while this area on the chart, while it is excessive adenosine, really what it is excessive sleepiness. And this is quite a useful thing to use if you're struggling to fall asleep and you want to fall asleep quicker and stay asleep overnight. So if you think about these two systems that control our sleep, so the adenosine sleep drive and the circadian rhythm, there are ways that we can influence these systems so that they work for us rather than against us. So starting with the circadian rhythm, if we can really emphasize the wake phase of the circadian rhythm, then the sleep phase will arrive a lot more naturally at night. So the first thing to do is to keep a regular wake time, getting up at the same time each day and not varying it by more than an hour at weekends, builds in that regularity with the circadian rhythm. The second thing to do, so the circadian rhythm is entirely set up in response to light. So getting out into bright daylight, ideally in the first hour after waking, really helps reinforce the wake phase of the circadian rhythm. And if you can't get outside, then sitting next to a bright window can also help. And there's also some artificial lamps, if you get them at the right wavelength, that can also help here. And then in terms of the adenosine sleep drive, so adenosine builds every minute that you're awake. So the longer you stay awake, the more sleepy you're going to feel. And this is why you often hear this advice, if you're not sleeping well, to get into bed a little bit later. And sometimes this seems really counterintuitive, but when you think about it in terms of adenosine, it means if you get into bed half an hour or 60 minutes later, that you're getting into bed with that an hour of extra sleep drive. So you're much more likely to fall asleep quicker and stay asleep overnight. So hopefully through this video, you can start to get an idea about how your sleep is controlled. It is true, you can't control sleep directly, but you have an awful lot of indirect control. If you've got any other questions about how you can control your sleep, then please do put them in the comments. And if you found this video useful, then don't forget to hit subscribe.